I'm Dr. Rachel Griffiths, and I'm with my father and partner in aquatics.
Dr. Tom Griffiths.
Welcome to the Drowning Files, where each week we share a lawsuit we've been involved in or another true story with suggestions to learn from these tragedies to save lives. What case do you have today?
Today I have a case, the case of the missing case. Sometimes when I'm called to serve as an expert witness, this will be either by the defending lawyer, the lawyer who's defending a facility, a swimming pool, a water park, a lake against an accident or against a drowning, or I'm hired by the plaintiff attorney. Now, the plaintiff represents the family that is suing for the injury or the loss of life. And sometimes, on some occasions, I will do an inspection. I will travel a good distance to go to the site where this incident happened. And then the case just disappears. And what comes to mind now is a case that happened several years ago in New York State. Now, if you're unfamiliar with New York State in the United States, New York State, as you travel north from New York City, the Big Apple, you find the Adirondack Mountains, the Catskill Mountains, which are lovely, a lot of wilderness. But what is characterized by central New York are these rivers, streams, and deep gorges, these deep valleys. And as a result, there are many waterfalls. Watkins Glens is a famous waterfall up there, and there are many, many more. And people find these waterfalls literally in the middle of nowhere. So, to talk about this particular case, I get a call from an attorney. He's representing the family of a young lady who died while jumping off a waterfall. And he asked me if I would take a look at the situation and tell him what I think about the case. Well, I drove to New York State, which is not that far. It's probably half a day travel from where I live in Pennsylvania. And I met the attorney there. And uh, this was an unusual case because we were in real deep woods, very, very thick vegetation. And when we parked in this parking lot in a park owned by the state, we could hear rushing water in the distance. And so we trudged on these paths, I remember, seemed like forever to get to find the stream that fed this famous waterfall, which was on different websites, different pages on the internet showing people jumping off the waterfall into the pond below. So as I'm walking with this attorney, we finally get to the river, and it's really a small river, more like a stream, which has a hard rock bottom, looked like slate. And we walked on this river towards the rushing water where we could hear the water. And we were in the wilderness, and I'm saying to myself, how could anyone who owns this land protect people from getting into the stream? Because it went through the mountains and through the forest, and anyone could access this stream at any time from any angle. And so as we got closer to the waterfall, it got louder and louder. And I'm a former springboard diver, and I've dived off 10-meter towers. But when I got to the edge of this waterfall where the accident happened, I can tell you truthfully, I was really scared. It just looked scary. And in fact, I stayed back away from the edge because I didn't want to fall off the waterfall. And so what happened in speaking to the attorney was this girl was partying with friends at this waterfall. People were jumping off to the pond below. And it was known by people who went there that in order to make a successful jump from the waterfall, You had to jump out in order to avoid the rocks. Now, tragically, and I don't want to make light of the situation, this young lady just didn't realize that she had to jump out, and she simply stepped off this waterfall. Now, I might add, by my recollection, it was at least 10 meters or 30 feet high, and it was probably closer to 15 or 20 meters. It was a long way up. And so this young lady hit the rocks on the way down and then died. I don't know whether the cause of death was traumatic blunt force to her head and other body organs, or if she actually drowned. But that's the case that I was presented with. Now, if I can just go a step further. In the United States, you have something called the Recreational Land Statute. The Recreational Land Statute means that if you have land that the public wants to use for fishing or hunting or hiking or bird watching, you can let them use that without a charge, and you won't be held liable if they get hurt. In other words, they cannot sue. You are immune if you allow people to recreate on your land without creating a hazardous situation. And it's usually for unimproved lands. And so I told this lawyer that this might be covered by the recreational use statute, which protect landowners from people who use their land from suing. And he asked me, well, what about signage? And I think we should use good signage that uses warning shapes, warning colors, and warning symbols. But in this case, I didn't know how you could strategically place the signs because it was so heavily wooded, and whether or not they would remain there and whether or not they would be effective. And he asked me about barriers, and I thought that was impractical. Anyway, in discussing the case, it just disappeared. I was never called again. And this happens from time to time. So what actually happened? I don't know what happened. Either the family, after speaking to the attorney, decided not to sue, or they filed a lawsuit and the recreational use statute kicked in and said, no, you cannot sue us because of this statute, which allows us to let you use the land free of charge. And unless, there's a key phrase in there, unless the landowner does what we call a willful and wanton disregard for safety, and where they create this hidden hazard, then they can be liable. But if the land just sits there naturally and the land thrives the way it normally does without improvement or without traps, so to speak, excuse me, then that landowner is immune. So the other thing that could happen in these similar type cases is sometimes there's a liability cap. We haven't mentioned this either. And I believe in Texas, you could have the worst case in the world where the defendant was, horrible, did everything wrong, and this person drowned. But the cap at the time I was last involved in Texas was $250,000. And while that seems like a lot of money, and no amount of money is going to bring a life back from a lost child or a lost spouse drowning, lawyers take anywhere from a third to 50%. And sometimes when you have a very low cap, like $250,000, $350,000, either the attorney or the family or both will say, it's just not worth it to move forward, because the expenses of hiring expert witnesses and traveling to the site and taking depositions and so forth and so on could exceed that amount. And so oftentimes that case just disappears. And that's what happened in this Waterfall case, which was very tragic. But I put a lot of time and effort into making an inspection, and then it just disappeared, which is very frustrating. And more frustrating than not pursuing the case is that. So that's the case of the disappearing case, which happens, um, I want to say often, maybe 20% of all my cases are disappearing cases or phantom cases. And that's it, Rach.